Danya Perry is a former prosecutor of the Southern District of New York. She served as a deputy chief of the criminal division. A. Scott Bolden is a former prosecutor in New York, now a white-collar criminal defense attorney. Let me stay on this theme with you, Danya. Just, you know, it was such a striking moment last week with Pezzola says, you know, I'm so sorry, and then says Trump won. Tarrio didn't even seem to really try to perform remorse. I mean, to say law enforcement are heroes, the city of D.C. didn't deserve to have their city chewed up like this, it was a national embarrassment. All those could be true and say nothing about I was wrong to attempt to end the peaceful transfer of power. And it does seem like that maybe played a role in the sentencing ultimately.
There is always a needle to thread at a sentencing for a defendant who has been convicted at trial by a jury. They don't want to admit too much because they are banking on an appeal. Or perhaps a pardon, but
although they can say whatever they want if they want a pardon, right?
Correct. In fact, he probably chose wrong if that's what he's going for. Words relatively carefully, but I think in this case the judge saw right through it. In fact, the prosecution anticipated that he would give the appearance of remorse without truly being remorseful. They pointed to precedent where he expressed regret, but wasn't truly, and then went right back out and did the same kind of thing. So I think they kind of drew the sting, as it were, and anticipated that, and the judge had none of it. It was very clear.
This is even though this is the longest sentence, Scott, at 22 years, which is the record now, it's still 11 years below what the government was asking for, and you know, they had asked for what this terrorism enhancement, basically, in the sentencing, and Judge Kelly, who had previous requests for terrorism enhancements, has explained that he doesn't think this essentially was terrorism, or that it doesn't fit what that enhancement should cover. He basically did that again today. These are very, very stiff sentences, but I'm curious what your reaction to that is.
Well, he's been planted down the line. This terrorism enhancement, I thought he gave Tarrio to get to 22 years the enhancement. He may not have. He's enhanced it some in some other prior cases. But here's the deal. This was the general of this Proud Boys, right? I love the but-for test. But for the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, the violence and the deaths that took place on January 6th, the attack on democracy, the attempt to get to elected officials to stop the transfer of power, none of this would have occurred without the planning and execution of the Proud Boys and maybe the Oath Keepers. That's what you have to keep in mind. It didn't matter that Tarrio wasn't there. He was the mastermind behind it, and all of those thousands of MAGA followers that attacked the Capitol, remember, they went in after the Proud Boys, right? They went in after the Oath Keepers, and I think the judge had that in mind, and the judge said, I'm not convinced, especially if you try to compare yourself to George Washington, they really believed they were in a revolutionary time, and that they were going to change democracy like this. It made no sense. It bordered on the nonsensical, and now they're serving time for it.
Yeah, and that point is an important one because you've got two people, Stuart Rhodes, who's the head of the Oath Keepers, who was also convicted of seditious conspiracy, Danya, and is doing, I think, 17 years, I think was his sentence. He also didn't ever breach the Capitol. In Tarrio's case, he wasn't even in Washington, D.C. He'd been picked up on a gun charge, and so wasn't even in Washington, D.C. Obviously, Donald Trump is not facing seditious conspiracy charges from Jack Smith. But there's something to the idea that you are legally culpable and can be legally culpable for the violence operationally without ever actually going into the Capitol. That's now quite well established in these two cases.
Absolutely. That certainly proves the point. You see it all the time in your everyday case, and we certainly see it here. And judges are required to have some kind of proportionality to the sentencing. If you could map them out on a graph, you would have the leaders, of course, getting more time. Here, there was almost no way the judge was going to ever issue a sentence of 33 years. It was going to be at least as much as the other leaders, the Oath Keeper, as you say, but it wasn't going to be anywhere near that. That would be disproportionate and disparate. Right. So here you can anticipate if the former president is, in fact, convicted, yes, the charges are different. Yes, a terrorism enhancement might not apply, but a judge will take it very, very seriously. You know, just like the other guest just said, you know, this is a but-for situation. And as many people have said, and as the prosecutor said, you know, the former president lit the flame here. These guys were the gasoline, and you know, so that likely will, if there is, we'll see when this trial happens. We'll see when the sentencing happens. We'll see what the appeals look like. But at some point, a judge will factor all of these other sentences into consideration.
And that, to the point that Tom Jackman was making earlier from the Washington Post about the sort of the Judge Kelly here taking his time and saying his piece. I mean, he's had opportunity to say his piece because this is his trial, and he's had multiple people who have come before him for sentencing. But it is always interesting, Scott, when a judge who's this sort of impartial arbiter sort of converts into, essayist, polemicist, whatever they are, right, in the sentencing phase where they get to sort of vent how they actually feel about this entire thing that went down in front of them.
Well, they're the fact finder, and they draw conclusions of law. They've listened to all the evidence, and then they're going to give you their take. One of the important things about the sentencing, whether he gave the terrorism enhancement or not, you got to remember federal judges and state judges, they can take everything into account.
That's
whether
right.
it's a prior bad act, whether it's prior statements, he puts it all in the mix and says, I'm going to sentence you to 22 years, and here's why. He's going to make a record just in case there's an appeal, and that's important for the prosecution and the defense. I think he did a nice job. He could have given him more, especially because it was an attack on the democracy. But again, being consistent with prior sentencing is very important to the future defendants in that courthouse.
Yeah, it does seem to me, again, as sort of having covered both of these trials with two different federal judges, that by and large, these were severe but reasonable penalties that were handed down by judges in these cases.
Yeah, look, the prosecution asked for a lot more. It was 33 years. They got 22. That's not unusual at all. Sometimes they, go for the moonshot and take what they get. Here, right. The defense wasn't asking for, I think they were asking for 15 or less. So I think they had a sense of where this particular defendant would fall out. And, the judge really kind of hit it exactly where, the other ones shook out.
Yeah, we now found ourselves with the two sort of top-tier kind of violent groups that had organized and fomented the violence, a but-for link in the causal chain, as Scott said, having been tried by jury, their peers, found guilty, sentenced. There's some other outstanding work to be done in terms of people that were a level above them. Danya Perry, A. Scott Bolden, thank you both.